Federalists, Jeff Live, with Eduardo Alvarado, the President of Jeff Austria.
Today we're going to be talking about COP26 and is world federalism a solution for the climate crisis? So today we have two very special guests joining us in this stream. So we have Eva Lichtenberger, who is a former member of European Parliament and a European Federalist, and we also have Eston McKeague, who is the president of the Young World Federalists. So it's my pleasure to have both of you here, and I'm very curious to see what are the things that you have for us today, especially relating to this topic of what happened in Glasgow a month ago already. So let's start with introductions. So as I was mentioning before, I'm Eduardo Alvarado, and I am the president of the Young European Federalists in Austria. And maybe we can start with Eva. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. What is your background? What are the kind of projects that you're working on right now? So welcome, Eva.
Yeah. Very nice evening for all of you. I'm Eva Lichtenberger. I started my political work and my political career in the end as an environmentalist engaged for reducing emissions from an industrial plant, and especially for the heavy goods transport on street passing the Alps, which was causing damages to alpine environment. I was also part of the government in my home region, Tyrol. And after the National Parliament, I was then in the European Parliament for 10 years. Working right now, I am on the Conference of the Future of Europe. And there I have a possibility to work within the civil society organizations and in the cluster for digital transformation. So these seem to be two very different things, but they are very important, both of them, for coming to solutions for the challenges that we are facing. And of course, I'm Federalist, and I'm in the Austrian group of the European Federalists.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Eva, and I'm very curious to see what you have to say about this, about what happened in COP26. And we're moving on now for introduction with Eston McKeague. So same thing, Eston, maybe can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your background? What do you do at the Young World Federalist? So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. As you said, my name is Eston McKeague, and I'm the president of the Young World Federalists. And I'm also a board member of Citizens for Global Solutions, which is like the World Federalist organization in the US. I'm originally from Seattle in the United States, but now I live in Berlin, Germany. And I studied global affairs and economics and religion and culture. And I got my master's in political science at the University of Amsterdam. And right now I'm a graphic and web designer alongside all of my work advocating world federalism. So a little bit about the World Federalists, or the Young World Federalists. We're a global youth movement building support for world federalism and global democracy. And we do this through online advocacy, organizing local events, and through our chapters and training young activists. We have partners all around the world, and we're eager to revitalize the movement for a united world with a strong youth movement. With respect to the climate, we have a climate and environmental campaign called Save Earth, or #SaveEarth. Where we advocate for a just transition away from fossil fuels, an end to extractivist development practices, enforcement of environmental law, and the creation of a sustainable circular world economy. We're also strong supporters of the Ecocide campaign. I have a pin from that right here, which seeks to add ecocide to the list of crimes under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. And additionally, we're strong advocates of a stronger climate governance at the global level, either through a reformed United Nations or the creation of a global environmental authority to stem the rising CO2 emissions. So that's my short introduction.
Thanks for the introduction, Eston. And now we can move a little bit more into the actual into the topic. And but we cannot talk about COP26 without mentioning the Paris Agreement. So maybe we can start with that. Maybe we can start. You can start telling me what are your thoughts on the Paris Agreement and what is its significance as well for combating climate change. So now we can do the other way around. So now, Eston, we can start with you, and then later we're going to move with you, Eva.
Okay. Obviously the Paris Climate Agreement was a landmark agreement that set a new precedent for climate governance around the world. That being said, there are some obvious flaws with the treaty. Namely, it does focus a great deal on carbon markets to achieve net zero, which essentially allows carbon emitters to continue to burn fossil fuels as long as they pay for carbon offsets. And something that I learned in Glasgow was that carbon offsets can be extremely problematic, as the process often involves NGOs and companies from the global north buying up huge amounts of land in the global south and dictating rules to the people living there. This often becomes a form of neocolonialism and represents the pattern of the wealthy north pushing its problems off onto the global south. Additionally, the agreement or the treaty, the agreement is an international treaty, which can and is ignored by the countries that signed it. So essentially, relying on international treaties means that countries can continue to burn fossil fuels at any rate that they choose, no matter what the treaty says. What's needed is binding world law drafted in a democratic process. For too long, the 8 billion citizens of Earth have been excluded from global governance, and the result is an anarchic system of nation states who act primarily in their own interest. It's utopian to believe that self-centered nation states will suddenly be concerned with the well-being of the planet and humanity as a whole. We need to transform the system of global governance if we are going to find solutions to global challenges like the climate crisis.
Thanks for the answer, Eston. And I think a little bit later, as a follow-up to that, we're going to move on a little bit more into global governance, particularly as well with how federalism can help with that. And but before that, we can move. Same question for you, Eva, regarding the Paris Agreement and its significance. So I'm curious to see what you have to say.
Yeah, well, since I've been taking part in the Copenhagen COP meeting, I know how these meetings are running. And already in Copenhagen, we wanted and tried to achieve something like the Paris treaty. So it was for me really a step forward when it came to the point to have this treaty, but the flaws are already mentioned before. We have this problem that there is still this colonial thinking that we, as the global north, have to explain to the global south what's better and what's good for them. And the revenge is coming soon, of course, because then they say, we don't want to follow your rules because it doesn't help us to get what we want, also concerning climate change and things like that. So this Paris Treaty was a stepstone, a very important stepstone, but it still lacked the measures to be followed on. And this would have been the duty of the oncoming COPs, just to decide on consequences and decide on concrete measures, because it's really easy and it's nice to declare what we will do in 50 years. But it's much more important and much more difficult to explain what now and right now has to be done to come to our agreements, or to really follow up to our agreements. So it was an important stepstone, but the point was really that there was the obligation to declare what every nation state would be able and willing to do in the former years. But we saw the result. The result was that the declarations added up to seven great climate target. And this would be much too much. So the nation states went the way they always do, as egoistic as nation states are moving. They declared some easy to do things for themselves and hoped for the others to do more. And this is going on since then. And this was also the big hope for Glasgow, that there would be a change now in policy, and that we really would come to consequences and to steps that really are starting right now and not in 20 years, something like that. It's nice to set goals, and it's important, but you can't end up with them.
I think you already set up the transition to the next part very well, Eva. So maybe we can move on to the next part, which is, so we already talked a bit about the Paris Agreement. Now we can talk a little bit more about Glasgow. So what happened in Glasgow a month ago? Maybe also if there were any other important milestones in between as well. So I'm curious to see, again, from your side, Eva, what happened in Glasgow and why was COP26 important or relevant, or maybe in which parts it also wasn't, right? So I'm very curious to see what you think about this.
Well, Dublin was, of course, there were a lot of hopes beforehand, that Glasgow would really then make a point and evaluate the national plans and say, okay, this is what you would have to do additionally, something like that. But of course, and this is of course one of the most important debates, it was all about coal and the use of coal and the emissions from coal, which is, especially for India and China, one of the major topics. And we must say, as coming from the north, also the most difficult topics to find solutions for. Because there was always the illusion that the developing states now could jump over the mistakes that we have done and just go into a transition for a eco-compatible future. But this was not feasible, obviously, because on the other hand, the influence of our trade systems and of our industrial complex companies that influenced also the ongoing industrial evolution in those states were the other way around. So as long as we import soya, for example, to feed our cattle, there is something wrong. So we were talking about the coal phase out, and it looked very well till the last night, when then India and China weakened the whole thing to a point where I fear that it will not have a big effect. The other topic was, of course, the whole issue of emissions trading. And I hope very much, and this is not yet clear how it will be done, that a global emission trading system does not make the mistakes that Europe did in the beginning of its own emission trading systems, where too many allowances for free were given out at the beginning to enable transition and trade. And so it didn't have any effect. So this is still a dilemma for all those states that have to implement it, how it really will be done in a way that it creates limiting effects for the emissions. And the biggest deficit of the Glasgow conference, in my point of view, was that there was no correct policy concerning the developing South. The financial help that was promised was not flowing. And still now, we do not really have the declarations of the northern rich states, how and in what amount they would help the South for their development to a eco-compatible future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's very interesting the issues that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I believe they're very, very closely related, or they mostly fall into the design of what the treaty or what the agreement was in Glasgow. Do you think, based on what you mentioned, or maybe also in other factors as well, what are going to be the implementation issues, or what do you foresee as being implementation issues of what was agreed upon? So I think you mentioned very well the design aspects of it, but do you think there's going to be, what do you think are going to be implementation issues?
Well, one of the big problems that we have on global level is what will be the consequences if someone does not do anything? If someone is giving nice declarations for the future and for the next 30, 45, 50 years, but the steps necessary to be done are not made. So there's a lack of consequences, of course. Therefore, I think we have to have a closer look on trade agreements and what they include and how we should handle them. Because if it comes to implementation, you also have to have consequences if not. Watch the Corona crisis. As long as you don't have consequences, there is a certain part, and it's not the poorest part, that would not obey, that would not do what they would have to do. So things like rule of law on global level is still lacking. This is, of course, also the difficulties if democracies have to deal with dictatorships or authoritarian states. So this lies in the nature of this global differences that will make it very difficult. But I still have some hope that the ongoing natural disasters that we watch will wake up also those that do not want to think about the future. And I think also the Europeans should be very, very careful and very fast in their action, because if we now already watch a slower movement of the Gulf Stream, we can imagine and we can already calculate what this will be for Europe, what this will mean for European temperatures, for rain and for snowfall. So I think here there are so many warning lights, and I still see that a lot of people try to cling to the old system as long as they can.
Thanks for the answer, Eva. And maybe we can transition a little bit more into potential solutions, or particularly into what is the role that federalism can play in achieving this, particularly when it comes to global cooperation. But maybe there are also some other aspects in which federalism can come in handy for solving this. So we can start now with you, Eva, and then later we move on with you, Eston.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you look at the diversity of the world, you can easily understand that only federalism can be a structure, an umbrella structure for the world that would work in the end. Because as we see in history, it's the only system that's able to guarantee diversity, but nevertheless come to a joint conclusion. So I think federalism is the way in which we have to go if it comes to the global level, but we must not forget that it also needs some steering groups, some steering factors apart from industrial combinates that's the world. So what I believe is federalism is a solution, but there must be the will. We right now watch a return to nationalist thinking in a lot of European member states, but also in the rest of the world. So this is, I think, one of the most pressing questions. We all have very diverse states already. The global mobility has brought us to have the world at home. And this is not seen as kind of enriching our culture, but it is seen as endangering whatsoever. And what I think is that federalism has to deal with these questions of nationalism and this nostalgia and this nostalgic point of view to the past, which was not so great, as some try to communicate us. But I think we have to deal with this problem because if not, we will never come to a, let's say, common goal, common targets, and common measures.
Very well said, Eva. Thanks for the answer. Eston, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with a lot of what Eva said, and very enlightening responses. As you said, the tendency for nation states to push things into the future is really limiting progress on addressing the climate crisis, and that's a very nice way of putting it. One could easily begin to draw lines of causality from the self-centered actions of nation states, mostly in the global north, to the position we find ourselves now. And I definitely liken it to sort of someone who wants to lose weight saying they're going to do it in 50 years. It's just not a very efficient way to address the problem. Or better yet, with carbon offsets, giving food to someone who's hungry as a way to lose weight yourself. It's just, there's a lot of, I like the body metaphor. Anyway, I also agree with Eva on the focus on the global economy. Right now, we have a single united global economy. Yet the global politics is still divided into 193 countries. So looking at an economic solution for this global problem is probably a faster pathway to addressing the issue in the short term, at least. So we advocate policies like a global carbon price negotiated at the World Trade Organization, which has the power to ensure fair cooperation from countries with its dispute settlement mechanism. And you could also issue global green bonds through the IMF's special drawing rights, basically providing money for countries to do a transition away from fossil fuels. So there are economic measures that could be taken in the short term, because as much as I do believe in world federalism as the way to solve this problem, we are in an existential crisis that needs solutions that work in the current framework. But I do believe that anything without the democratic legitimacy of a world parliament would still just be a stopgap and not addressing the root cause of the problem, which is this anarchic system of nation states. So turning now to the Glasgow Climate Pact. So it's not, as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. It's not an international treaty, at least not yet. It's just an agreement. It's almost like a resolution. So it's even weaker than the Paris Agreement. Even though this was supposed to be the stronger implementing the Paris Agreement, this was supposed to be where it got stronger and more concrete, and it actually went the other direction, and we have a weaker aspirational document that has no teeth in it. So in a way, climate governance has actually taken a step back. There were a few minor steps forward, but it's with the deforestation agreement and things like that, that was important and great. But in terms of limiting fossil fuel emissions, we've taken a step back. So in a world federation, the Earth's climate would be a global public good under the jurisdiction of a global democracy. And countries would be bound by the climate regulations passed by the collective citizens of Earth, which is what we see. They're unbound by anything. They're only bound by their own self-interest, and that's how they act. It's almost like a teenager. Now, we must get nations and people to realize that the system of global governance is inadequate in addressing this crisis. Building a sense of global solidarity between people around the world, a sense of world citizenship, if you will, is critical to this cause. However, this is only the first step in creating a legal world citizenship in which individuals and the next generations are entitled to a healthy global climate. Only with the rights of humanity enshrined in a global constitution and upheld via global institutions can we save the planet and reverse the deadly trend of rising carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the answer, Eston. And when it comes, so you already mentioned a few of the, in your view, the potential solutions or the potential way forward from a state level. What do you think on the state level as well, but also on the individual level, maybe on the terms of whatever we demand from our politicians? What do you think is the things, let's say, getting a little bit more pragmatic, more practical? What are the things that we can do in order to help to get to the goal of 1.5 degrees outlined in the agreement?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't think there's an adequate answer that anybody can give you to that. It's sort of the $1 million question. I obviously believe that we need to transform the system of global governance, and anything short of that is inadequate. I think we've been trying to take the pragmatic approach, probably since the 1970s when this crisis became public knowledge. Many people said, okay, let's see what we can do in the short term or step by step. And it's just, as I just laid out, we're still moving. We're still moving in the wrong direction. And I think all countries on Earth should simultaneously agree to reverse carbon emissions and keep carbon in the ground. COP26 itself was ignored by many carbon majors, or the countries and companies emitting the most carbon. So it's really important that we have a movement of people that pressure national governments not only to act on the climate crisis, because that's already a really big movement, but to share sovereignty, to pressure their country to share sovereignty and collectively do the hard work of transforming the global economy. Even if Europe becomes carbon neutral, that obviously would not solve the global crisis. So we need to be pressuring national governments to think globally when it comes to this issue, because it's a global problem. Moreover, special attention must be paid to ensure that any system of global governance is inclusive of all people on Earth. The voices of those living in areas most affected by climate change should be amplified and listened to by everyone. Many people living in the global north won't be impacted by rising temperatures and sea levels to nearly the same extent as those living in small island states or dependent on an agrarian economy. Not saying there's not any impacts. Of course, things are getting warmer, but there's already people that are leaving their islands and migrating, and we're obviously not going to have to do that in Germany. So we can have no just transition or no transformation of the economy without global social justice being at the forefront of our actions. So I think that as individuals, amplifying the voices of those most affected by this crisis is something that we can all do as individuals. And not only just amplifying their voices, not only retweeting a tweet, but bringing those voices into the parliaments, into the halls of power of your own national government. So proving that this citizen far away, this person far away on the other side of the planet, that your national politician, your representative is also beholden to their interests, and sort of forming this global solidarity, this global polity. It's really up to us to do that. And then some short actions that people can take. We have on the Young World Federalist website, you can take action right now to pressure national governments to act for the interest of humanity. So we have our Save Earth campaign. You can print a poster with some slogans on it. We have social media posts, letters you can send to your national or your representative, your politicians, and a place to sign and support. So we try to make some quick actions that people can take right now.
Thanks for the answer. From your side, Eval, what do you think we can expect from our politicians, or what can we expect at the individual level and at the state level as well, to make sure that we get to the goal of 1.5 degrees?
Well, I think the problem, the fundamental problem in the whole issue is that it is all a question of time, and we don't have time anymore. So if we would have started 30 years ago with measures and debates about what actions we have to take globally, we might be on another point. But the problem is forming those international bodies and bringing them into action is not a thing that you do in 1 year or in 2 or 3 years. Therefore, I think one of the points that politicians globally should take as their first action is that we have to do something with the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs in our culture, as I call them, are those oriented on the old economic models, which brought us to the point where we are, but they don't want to let them go. It's the car industry, it's the aviation industry, it's the extraction industry, it's mining, and so on and so on. And all of them are trying to block any change in economic governance. And it is economic governance what we need, because as long as those dinosaurs are influencing and more or less aligning policy in national states or in big entities like Europe or China, US, influencing them to not give up the old economic model of free trade according to the rules that we had in the past, we will not really come to a point. I mean, as long as we import Christmas trees from Russia or from countries where deforestation is happening, it is hard to help the climate with private actions or small initiatives. I think one of the major points is international trade and the rules on which this is based. This, for Europe, for example, means to have a look at all the old trade agreements, if they really are just, and this is one of the requirements which is rarely fulfilled in one of those trade agreements. And if they are in respecting also the needs of the population of the country where that you deal with. I think the consciousness of people could be already on that point, because if we have learned a lesson from the COVID crisis, is the one that it doesn't help if my member state has good values, if not the rest of the world is also going in the same direction. here we see very clearly on individual level what global networks mean, what global mobility means. And therefore, I think we should learn this lesson. We should really learn this lesson and say, as long as we do not have climate justice in all in all national states, in all bigger states like Europe, US, China, India, and so on, we will not have any solution. So the next COP, in my point of view, has to deal with the relations between the industrial north and the rest of the world, and how to pass knowledge, how to pass capacities, how to pass finances to help them to develop in the right direction. So I think COVID has told us that we have to think globally, that it is no more the time of looking at your own valley and that's all. So what we have to see is really that without solidarity on global level, we won't make any step forward. And therefore, one of the biggest part of all the measures that we have to take at home is to talk about the relations between the industrialized North and the rest of the world, because this is what really is pressing. If we don't solve that problem, we will never come to a joint agreement whatsoever, because they will come and declare whatever they want. And if there's any follow-up, is out of our control. And this is that people have to understand, I guess.
Very well said, Eva. And maybe just to finish this conversation, I wanted to also just hear from your side, Eston, related to collaboration and inclusion of youth. You as a Young World Federalist, what do you think? How do you think this can be achieved? What do you think is the way that we can get young people, or that we can work with youth inclusion programs? I know that that's not everything. I know that that's not where the whole pact and the whole treaty relies upon. But I think that's one of the key areas where you're, let's say, where you're contributing to it. So, what do you think? What do you think is the way to go when it comes to youth inclusion for these topics?
Yeah. First, I just want to echo, if I completely agree that this is really an economic regulation issue, and I think that it should be framed as such. I mean, we should almost remove the word climate from all of these discussions, because it's really an economic issue. Yeah, I just couldn't agree more with what you were saying. In terms of youth inclusion, it's very important, obviously, especially to get rid of the dinosaurs, or to at least enlighten them. And it's often spoke about by leading politicians and, popular people, influencers, and so on. Everybody talks about youth, and it's really hot in the UN. They have a youth envoy, and they're thinking about more youth seats at the table and all this stuff. So it's really, I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see so much momentum around getting youth involved. I think because the climate, people do see it as a generational thing. And so there's a lot of focus on getting younger people, because it matters more to them than I'm just going to keep saying dinosaurs because I love it. The climate matters more to the young people than the dinosaurs. But all too often, this sort of youth inclusion rhetoric translates explicitly into tokenism and sidelining and recruiting young activists away from climate activism and towards basically causes promoted by big businesses in powerful countries. So you see a lot of young people talking about what are their small things that they can do as individuals. Basically, how can I use a bamboo toothbrush and separate my recycling? I mean, these were talking points invented by the oil companies in the 1970s, focusing all of the ownership of this global problem on the individual. And so basically co-opting a lot of this momentum and translating it into essentially fossil fuel talking points. And it's cool because it's a young person and they're on Instagram. So I'd be really cautious, and it's really important to look critically at youth inclusion initiatives, and make sure that at the very least they're not being tokenized and they actually are seen as equals. And it's also up to us young people to fight for that and to not participate in places where we're not equals and don't offer that legitimacy to these bodies. Now, of course, we're all aware of the massive youth climate movement exemplified by Fridays for Future protests started by Greta Thunberg and many others around the world. And of course, I strongly admire these efforts and applaud the millions of young people who are willing to take a stand for their future and the future of the planet. It's amazing. I participate in them. I'm a part of it. That being said, Fridays for Future and other movements will often talk about uprooting the system. It's even their hashtag uproot the system. However, they don't really offer an alternative to the current system of global governance. So it's sort of uproot the system and replace it with what? Yeah. And so that's sort of where I believe world federalism and global democracy comes in. It's a transformation of global governance. So it's an alternative system of global governance that humanity needs to solve this crisis. So I'd love to see more youth activists calling for the necessary transformation of global governance. And we worked on this actually. So for the 8th annual Week for World Parliament in October, the Young World Federalists and our partners drafted an open letter for World Parliament, which was signed by climate activist groups from around the world. So we had Fridays for Future Senegal, El Salvador, Pakistan, the Citizens Network for Community Development in Zambia, the Sierra Leone, School Green Clubs, and Extinction Rebellion Uganda and Japan, all signed in support in the creation of a world parliament. And you will notice that Japan is pretty much the only Western country in that list, or global North country in that list. So it's very important. Who's interested in democratizing global governance?
Yeah.
Not necessarily those profiting from the current system. So this was a great sign that the youth climate activists are waking up to the reality of the system, that the system not only needs to be uprooted, but replaced with something better and replaced with a democratic world federation.
I would also say transformed, replaced or transformed into, because we see the revolutions and the blood that it created in history. So their transformation, I think, is one of the key words. And coming to the youth issue, what I watch in my generation is that some of them already say, "Oh yes, climate. This is some youth thing. It's not touching upon us." I always try to communicate to them. I mean, people. Do you want to have a hospital when you are old? Do you want to have caretakers when you are old? Who will do the work? Then you are dependent on them, and it's not the other way around. But the political power, the economic power is still in the hands not of the young generation. So I think a very important point should also be to raise the awareness of the generations right now in power and to go into discussion with them. Because if we really want to change, for example, economic treaties, you have to step into the political system. That's right. And because what I always hear from people of my age is, oh, yes, they are protesting now a little bit, but if they are married and have children and so on, then the whole thing will stop. People do ignore it still, what's going on. That all those crises that we are facing right now is man-made, is done by us, and can also be corrected by us. Because if it would be a natural process, this would be another issue. Then we only would have to find adaptation measures. But it is man-made, and it can also be corrected by man. And I think the important point is that those young generations right now that step into the system, and they are, and I'm really surprised, because if I think back on myself in that age, I think I was not so reflected as them. But they reflect on global structures that we have to deal with. And this is, of course, for all those grown up in the old system of national thinking, at maximum European thinking, and this is already a big step forward. I think we have to take them on board and get them on board, because they have the powers in their hand, be it economic, be it politically. And youth participation is one point. And you have really to be careful. And you mentioned the strategies that are done in that way. We have to be careful for not to use their energy for something else, but to really use it for creating a system that is able to come to conclusions that would solve the climate problem, for example, or be it the health problem or the economic crises that are coming back and back and back, or the stock market things, and so on and so on. So I think the alliances, the generation dialogue, is another thing that we have really to go for. I'm always happy to discuss with younger people what they expect from life, and so on and so on. But this is not the case for all of my generation, to be honest. So we have really to go for that.
Thanks for the answer, Eva. And on that note, I think that we can close the conversation for today. It was very interesting to see both of your opinions about it. I like what you were mentioning, Eston, about like the tokenization of young people, and how especially this, it tends to be translated into, yeah, the only thing that you have to do is like this little, just these small actions will make a big difference, which tends to be a very big diversion to what are the big things that we can do on the economic and on the political level. And yes, and thank you very much to both of you for joining today. It was a very interesting conversation, and thank you very much, everyone who watched this, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
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 Young European Federalists, Jeff Live, with Eduardo Alvarado, the President of Jeff Austria.